My stepson was shivering alone during the storm, so I stayed closer than I should have. The wind screamed against the cabin walls. His body trembled, helpless. I should have turned away. I didn't. One step, one breath, one touch too close, and suddenly, the line between us was gone. I never imagined it would happen like this. A cabin in the middle of nowhere. A storm that swallowed the roads whole. And Liam, standing there, shivering, looking so much like the boy I once tucked into bed after nightmares. The power had gone out hours ago. The cold seeped into everything, the walls, the floor, the very air between us. I could hear the wind howling through the cracks, the sound almost human in its grief. It was supposed to be simple. Stay warm, stay safe, wait it out until morning. But when I found him huddled under a thin blanket, his teeth chattering, his body trembling, something in me broke. Maternal instinct, I told myself, nothing more. I wrapped a second blanket around him, sat down beside him, close enough to share body heat. Close enough to smell the faint traces of soap on his skin. I should have left it at that. I should have pulled away the moment I felt the invisible thread stretching between us. The one that vibrated with every heartbeat, every unspoken thought. But I didn't. I stayed. Closer than I should have. The storm outside raged louder. Inside, a different storm began to rise. One I couldn't blame on the weather. One that lived beneath my skin, in the hollow spaces of loneliness I thought I had buried long ago. If I had walked away then, maybe nothing would have changed. Maybe the ground beneath my life wouldn't have cracked open the way it did. But I didn't walk away. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever feel the same again. The cabin was supposed to be a retreat. A chance to disconnect, to breathe, to remember what peace felt like. But even before the storm hit, the silence had already started to close in. My husband was called away on business the day we arrived. A last-minute deal he couldn't refuse, he said, kissing my cheek in passing. He promised to be back before the weekend, but promises in our marriage had long lost their shine. So it was just me and Liam. Two strangers tethered together by history but separated by years of careful distance. The first night without power was manageable. We bundled up in separate rooms, pretending not to notice the way the temperature dipped with every hour. By the second night, the cold was no longer just physical. It crawled inside my chest, a slow, aching hollowness that no number of sweaters could touch. I missed the noise of normal life. The hum of appliances, the buzz of notifications, even the mindless background chatter. Without them, every creak of the wood, every whisper of the wind outside, sounded like a reminder. You are alone. And you have been alone for a long, long time. Liam wasn't a boy anymore. I reminded myself of that every time our paths crossed in the narrow halls of the cabin. He had grown taller than I remembered, his shoulders broader, his face more defined, almost sharp in the dim light. But somewhere, tucked behind the edges of those features, I still saw the child I used to soothe after scraped knees and nightmares. The boy who once slipped his hand into mine without hesitation. We had never been particularly close. My marriage to his father had come when Liam was already past the age where new attachments mattered. Polite, distant, dutiful, he had played his role, and so had I. Over the years, holidays and occasional visits blurred into a comfortable kind of detachment. Not warmth, but not resentment either. This time felt different. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the absence of anyone else to hide behind. Our conversations were brief, practical. What do you want for dinner? How much firewood do we have left? But beneath each exchange, something simmered. A growing awareness. An uncomfortable recognition that the space between us wasn't just physical anymore. And when our eyes met, by accident, I told myself. There was a heaviness there. A pull neither of us dared name. The second night, the temperature dropped so sharply it felt like the cabin itself was shrinking. The fire in the hearth sputtered and died hours earlier, and no amount of layered blankets could chase the cold from the air. I found Liam curled up on the worn leather couch in the living room, wrapped in a too thin quilt. His lips were tinged a faint blue, his hands clenched into fists beneath his chin. The sight of him, so strong in daylight, now trembling and small, did something violent inside me. I grabbed another blanket from the linen closet and crossed the room before I could second-guess myself. He stirred when I tucked it around him, his eyes blinking open, glazed with sleep and something rawer, vulnerability. "You're freezing," I said, my voice catching. He nodded slightly but didn't speak. Didn't pull away either. For a moment, I stood there, unsure whether to retreat. The storm outside roared against the windows, rattling the old frames like angry hands. Inside, the only sound was our breathing, shallow, visible in the freezing air. "You'll be warmer if," I hesitated, shame prickling up my spine. "If we stay close." Liam didn't answer. He simply shifted, making space beside him, his body trembling with an exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. I sat down slowly, the couch dipping beneath our combined weight. I wrapped part of the blanket around myself, feeling the heat of his body like a second heartbeat beside mine. In the dim light, I could see the fine tremors in his hands. Without thinking, I reached out and covered them with my own. His fingers tightened, just slightly. And neither of us moved away. At first, it was innocent enough. Two people, desperate for warmth, sharing space against the brutal cold. I told myself that, over and over. But the longer we stayed like that, the thinner the excuses became. Our breaths mingled in the narrow space between us, shallow and uneven. I could feel the tremor in his body where it brushed mine, a subtle, rhythmic shiver that synced too easily with my own heartbeat. Somewhere between the crackle of the storm outside and the deafening quiet inside, the world narrowed down to this. His hand under mine, his body close enough to feel, not just see. I shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket. That's all it should have been. A practical movement. A harmless gesture. But my knee brushed his thigh. My shoulder grazed his chest. And in that breathless moment, neither of us flinched. Neither of us apologized. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Not the boy I used to know, but the man sitting quietly beside me, his gaze steady, unreadable. There was a question in the air, dangerous, inevitable, and neither of us dared speak it aloud. When I finally pulled my hand back, it wasn't because I wanted to. It was because I had to. Because any longer, and there would be no more pretending it was just about the cold. I stood up, wrapping the blanket tighter around myself, and mumbled something about needing another log for the fire. Anything to break the moment before it broke me. As I walked away, I could still feel the ghost of his warmth trailing after me. A thread I knew, even then, I wouldn't be able to sever. I kept myself busy after that, or at least, I pretended to. Feeding the fire, boiling water for tea, checking the windows for drafts that didn't exist. Anything to keep my hands occupied. Anything to keep from looking at him again. But it didn't matter. The awareness lingered. Thick, heavy. Everywhere. I could feel him moving around the cabin, quiet and deliberate. The soft creak of the floorboards when he shifted his weight. The barely there sound of his breath when he passed too close. My skin felt too tight for my body. My heart knocked painfully against my ribs. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was something worse, recognition. When I finally settled into a chair by the fire, Liam sat across from me, legs stretched out, the flickering light carving shadows across his face. He looked at me then, not directly. Not for long, but long enough. Long enough to leave a mark. I pulled the blanket higher over my shoulders, pretending the chill was to blame. But there was no mistaking the real reason for the flush creeping up my neck. No mistaking the way the space between us thrummed, alive and dangerous. The storm rattled the windows again, a low groan that vibrated through the floor. I closed my eyes, listening to it, willing it to drown out the pulse hammering in my ears. When I opened them, he was closer. Not close enough to touch, not yet. But closer than before. Close enough that I could see the slight tremble in his hands. Close enough that I could feel the heat rolling off his skin. Neither of us said a word. There was nothing left to say. Only the unbearable tension of bodies pretending not to ache. Only the terrible, beautiful knowledge of exactly what we were about to lose if either one of us moved. And still, I didn't tell him to leave. I didn't tell myself, either. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. Long after Liam had disappeared into the spare bedroom, long after the fire burned itself down to ash, I sat awake, staring into the dark. The silence felt heavier than the storm. It pressed down on me, squeezing every breath thin and brittle. The room smelled like smoke and melted snow and something else, something raw and human that clung to my skin. I told myself that nothing had really happened. No lines crossed, no words spoken, no kisses stolen. And yet, everything had changed. I could feel it in the way my heart stumbled every time I replayed the night in my head. In the way my body still remembered the heat of his, even from across the room. I buried my face in my hands, shame and longing tangling so tightly inside me I couldn't tell one from the other anymore. How had I let it get this far? How had I let myself need something so dangerous? At some point, maybe near dawn, I pulled the blanket tighter around myself and curled into the smallest version of me I could manage. A woman reduced to a breath. A heartbeat. A mistake waiting to happen. When I finally heard movement, the soft tread of Liam's footsteps downstairs, I kept my eyes closed, feigning sleep. I couldn't face him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The door clicked shut a few minutes later. And then I was alone. Truly, utterly alone in a way I hadn't felt in years. Not because of the storm. Not because of the walls of ice piling up outside. But because I had crossed a threshold inside myself. A place where loneliness no longer explained away the ache. And no matter how tightly I wrapped myself in blankets, no matter how fiercely I willed it away, the cold had already found its way in. And it was never going to leave. I spent most of the next day moving through the cabin like a ghost. Silent. Careful. Avoiding rooms he might be in. Avoiding reflections that might betray me. I cleaned things that didn't need cleaning. I rearranged books on shelves. I stared out frost-covered windows at a world swallowed whole by white. Every so often, I would catch a glimpse of him. The slope of a shoulder disappearing around a corner. The low murmur of his voice talking to no one in particular. And every time, my chest tightened so sharply I had to sit down, just to catch my breath. I hated how aware I was of him now. How the simple knowledge of his presence in the house twisted something deep inside me. Something I couldn't smooth away no matter how hard I tried. Part of me begged for distance. Space to forget. To file away the night before under the category of almost mistakes and unspoken regrets. But another part, a darker, more honest part, whispered that it was already too late. That whatever line we had pretended to stay behind had already been crossed in the places that mattered most. It wasn't about a touch. It wasn't about proximity. It was about the shift inside me. The unbearable knowledge that I didn't want to be saved from this feeling. I caught myself, more than once, lingering near doorways, listening for his footsteps, wondering if he would say something, do something, that would make the choice for me. That would either pull me back from the edge or push me over it completely. But he didn't. And neither did I. We stayed suspended in that terrible in-between. A breath held too long. A question neither of us dared to answer. When night fell again and the cabin was swallowed by darkness, I lay awake under heavy blankets, eyes wide open. The storm had passed, leaving behind a brittle, aching silence. It should have been over. It should have been simple. But desire doesn't obey the weather. And guilt doesn't cancel out wanting. It only buries it deeper. And deeper. Until it feels like the only thing you truly own. By the third morning, the roads were finally clear. The snowplows had made their slow, grumbling way through the hills, carving narrow paths back to the rest of the world. My husband returned that afternoon. Suitcase in hand, smile easy, the storm no more than an inconvenience to him. He kissed my cheek like nothing had changed, and for a terrifying second, I almost believed it. But inside the cabin, the air still trembled with the weight of things unsaid. Inside me, something had shifted so completely that I barely recognized my own reflection. I moved through the motions, unpacking his bags, making coffee, listening to his updates about meetings and hotel inconveniences, nodding in all the right places, smiling when prompted. A puppet carved from hollowed-out bone. Liam stayed distant. Polite, reserved, almost invisible. And yet, I felt him everywhere. In the brush of cold air when a door swung open. In the way my body tensed, unbidden, when his shadow crossed the floorboards. We didn't speak about that night. We didn't speak at all unless necessary. But silence has a way of speaking louder than words ever could. At dinner, I watched my husband scrolling through his phone between bites of reheated stew. I listened to the clink of his fork against the bowl, the casual monotony of a life we had carefully built on schedules and expectations. And I realized, with a kind of cold, painful clarity, that the part of me that used to reach for him was gone. Not wounded. Not resentful. Just gone. That night, when he reached for me in bed, I let him. I turned toward him. I offered my body like a peace treaty I no longer believed in. And afterward, as he drifted into easy sleep, I stared at the ceiling, feeling the unbearable distance between our skin. Between our lives. I didn't cry. There was no grief left. Only a hollow acceptance that something fundamental had broken inside me. Not because of Liam. But because, deep down, it had already been breaking for years. The storm had simply exposed the fractures. The rest was only a matter of time. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been easier if something catastrophic had happened. A screaming match. A confession. A betrayal too obvious to ignore. But that's not how most endings unfold. They fray quietly at the edges. One missed touch. One silenced thought. One heartbeat turned away from another. The night of the storm didn't destroy my marriage. It only revealed the truth I had been too afraid to face. I was already gone. Long before the snow fell. Long before Liam's eyes found mine in the darkness. I carry that night with me still. Not as a wound, but as a turning point. A moment when I stopped pretending that loneliness was easier than honesty. If you found yourself standing at that same threshold, Between duty and desire. Between the life you promised and the life you ache for. Would you stay where it's safe? Where it's familiar? Or would you step into the unknown? Even if it meant losing everything you thought you were supposed to hold on to? If it were you, what would you choose?